Now let's head to South Africa. It's hosting the BRICS group meeting this year with foreign ministers from the 5 nations gathering in Cape Town today. Now that comes ahead of a leader summit set for August. For more on this, let's go to Jennifer Zabasajja, our Africa correspondent who is in Cape Town. Jen, what are the priorities for the leaders meeting this week?
Yeah, Danny, I mean, it's really significant. As we know, BRICS was started back when a lot of these economies that encompass this organization were known as emerging economies. But of course, as we know, that's really grown in significance, and especially when we consider what the world is facing at this point in time. So when we look at the agenda, the official agenda, there's a few top line details that are going to be discussed this year, including delivering a mutually accelerated growth, sustainable development, and inclusive multilateralism. There's also some points about how BRICS, this grouping of nations, can create synergies between that of the G20. And of course, as we know, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa encompass a significant proportion of the future growth of the global economy. And so a lot of discussion is going to be had on how they can move forward in what they're calling a multipolar world. And as you mentioned earlier, there is potentially going to be discussions about a currency derived specifically for these BRICS nations. And especially when we think about the world as globally moving away from the dollar, we're seeing potentially discussions around whether or not BRICS can create a currency pegged to specific minerals, things like gold. And so that will be among the things that are discussed this week. But here in Cape Town, a number of foreign ministers, as you mentioned, the 5 from the BRICS nations, but then also a number of foreign ministers from nations from what they're calling the Friends of the BRICS. So that includes foreign minister from Argentina, from Indonesia, from Egypt, and from the UAE and Saudi. And so a lot of these other nations have been talking about whether or not it is time for them to be a part of it. And we'll see whether or not these 5 BRICS nations actually accepts them. Danny?
About a minute here, Jen. Speaking of who's coming, do we know whether or not Putin will be attending this year's Leaders Summit?
Yeah, I mean, that was the big question, Danny. Russia, of course, is a part of BRICS. Earlier this year, there was a lot of question about whether or not he was going to attend because of that ICC arrest warrant earlier this year for alleged war crimes. And so what we saw earlier this week from South Africa is they actually said that they granted diplomatic immunity to attendees of this summit this week and also later in August. So we'll see whether or not he comes, but a lot to look forward to.